Evening. Welcome to St. Peter's in Hove. I'm Father Alexander, and here we are to read the 13th chapter of Daniel. And that will be our 299th step in our walking tour through the Bible. Now, what I'd like you to do, so I don't have to tell you the story, which I won't do as well as the author has done, is I'd like you just to put me on pause and read Daniel 13 to yourself. Won't take very long. Okay, have you read Daniel 13? Then I'll begin. First of all, this is an independent short story. It's beautifully self-contained. It's true it's about Daniel, but it's about Daniel, a boy in Babylon, but just like Daniel the prophet in the rest of the book, but apart from that, there's no connection. The Daniel in this is, of course, a clever boy, and so that connects him with the Daniel the prophet. It reminds me very much of the story of Jesus in the temple as a 12-year-old boy, which also is a sort of freestanding story in the Gospel of Luke, which is to illustrate the brilliance of Jesus as a little boy, as on the threshold of adulthood. And this story illustrates the brilliance of Daniel on the threshold of adulthood as well. The second thing about this story is the following. It reminds us of the story of David and Bathsheba. You remember David saw Bathsheba in her bath, desired her, called for her, and then, well, after she became pregnant, decided to do away with her husband. A story of lust, desire, adultery, and murder. Here too, we have lust, desire. Adultery doesn't happen, but murder is plotted because they try to have her put to death for something she hasn't done. So, and of course, there's a bath. She's going to go and have a bath, and that's when they burst out of their hiding place. Now, it's a different sort of story to the story of David and Bathsheba, but I think it sort of trades on the similarities and differences. You're meant to have the story of David and Bathsheba in your mind. It's almost like a sort of variation on the theme. The other thing is, of course, it's a variation on another theme. Um, uh, Susanna is put on trial. She is to be condemned by the evidence of two witnesses, according to the Jewish law. She herself has been brought up in the law, and she keeps the law, so she would have recognized that. But one of the things, as Daniel points out, is the witnesses have to agree on absolutely every detail. Now, when Jesus came to trial before the Sanhedrin, lying witnesses, like these two elders, came forward and gave evidence which did not agree. And therefore, the Sanhedrin was unable to condemn Jesus for blasphemy. They instead said to Jesus, "Are you the Son of God?" asking him the leading question. And then he said, "I am the Son of God." And they said, "What need have we of evidence now?" So, in other words, Jesus was not condemned because of any evidence against him. He was condemned because of the words out of his own mouth. So, when you read the gospel accounts of the trial of Jesus, I think you do have the story of Susanna in your head. And maybe the people who wrote about that also had the story of Susanna in the back of their heads. The other thing we have, of course, is Jesus and the adulterous woman in St. John's Gospel. She is caught, and they said, "We walked in on her." In other words, she was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Moses said, "We should stone people like this to death. What do you say?" Say the elders of the people. Elders, please notice. And Jesus writes in the dust, presumably the sins of the elders, and they all creep away. One of the things that has been said, sort of a bit of a truism about the Holy Scriptures, is as follows. The law of Moses is pretty fierce when it comes to stoning adulterers. If you're caught in adultery, you should be stoned to death. A very horrible way to die. However, it's been pointed out at the same time that this punishment was almost never enacted, simply because you needed two witnesses to the adultery, and they had to agree on everything. And adultery, by its very nature, is a sin committed in private. Two witnesses is almost impossible. So, in other words, the law of Moses is such, by specifying two witnesses who must agree on all details, it's laying aside the possibility and cutting off the possibility of people being condemned by hearsay, which, of course, is how we condemn people for adultery. We're always reading in the tabloid press, so and so has been fooling around, and it's all hearsay. Remember that wonderful word, that a wonderful phrase that Othello, in his dementia caused by jealousy, says to Iago, I must have ocular proof. In fact, the only proof that Iago produces is his handkerchief, which is ridiculous. But of course, by that time, Othello has become so unhinged that he is open to suggestion, and he kills his own wife for adultery when she hasn't committed adultery, when she's as innocent as Susanna. So Susanna, the accused woman, is completely innocent. And Daniel is the only one sensible enough to point this out to people and to point out how her innocence can be vindicated. What I love about this story is I love the way, it could be Royal Rule Dahl or somebody, how the evil that the two elders want to do is something that rebounds on themselves. So there is a sort of a bouleversement, there is a closing of the circle. But this is what I like, is this is the description of the two elders who go to Hilkiah's house every day to talk about Jewish affairs in the morning, then they go home for lunch. And it says, two elderly men had been selected from the people that year to act as judges. Okay, fine. And then it goes on. These men were often at Joachim's house, and all who were engaged in litigation used to come to them. At midday, when the people had gone away, Susanna would take a walk in the husband's garden. The two elders used to watch her every day as she came in to take her walk, gradually began to desire her. They threw reason aside, making no effort to turn their eyes to heaven and forgetting the demands of virtue. Both were inflamed by passion for her, but they hid their desire from each other. They were ashamed to admit the longing to sleep with her, but they made sure of watching her every day. This is a very good description. First of all, they watched her every day. They became obsessed with watching her. They're stalkers, aren't they? That's a very modern phenomenon, stalking, cyber stalking, also stalking people in real life. But they are stalkers. Then they discover they're both at it, and then they hatch their ghastly plot. But look how this mania they have for her, this diseased desire they have for her, how it starts. Okay, she's beautiful, we know that. And it says they used to watch her every day, and they through reason they gradually began to desire her. Sin starts very small and it grows. You must resist it when it's small because you won't be able to resist it when it's bigger. Well, how do you resist it? Well, they threw reason aside. The first way to resist sin is be reasonable. These men are desiring the beautiful Susanna. She's married. She's not going to be interested in them. Be reasonable. You've got a snowball's chance in hell of getting what you want from Susanna. Be reasonable. And the other thing is, don't punish yourself with this terrible lust. Be reasonable. But they threw reason aside. They gave in to their lust, making no effort to turn their eyes to heaven. They didn't pray. They made no effort to turn their eyes to heaven. They just looked at Susanna. They didn't. So there was a failure of reason. There was a failure of will and forgetting the demands of virtue. There was, if you like, a throwing aside of all their lives as they had been up till then. So when somebody falls into serious sexual sin or serious sin of another type, these are the three steps. First of all, you're not reasonable. Secondly, it starts small, but you let it grow. You fail to act against it, failure of the will. And thirdly, setting virtue aside, failure or a rejection of your entire life up to now, you make a sudden turn towards sin. So, in other words, I suppose, here I am, I'm a moral theologian. Did I say, here they are, their fundamental option to do the law, to do good, they're just chucking it out of the window. It starts gradually, but it builds to a crescendo. They were ashamed to admit it, but they were inflamed by passion for her. Now, passion is the opposite of reason. In other words, they go mad. Well, I think that is a pretty accurate description. This, and they become her stalkers, and eventually they try and become her rapists, and then eventually they try and become her murderers. You see how that sort of snowballs. It starts small, but it snowballs. A pretty accurate description of how sin works. And so it's a lovely short story. It's a warning to us. It's a didactic short story, a warning to us not to fall into the sin of lust. And it's also an advertisement to us of just how brilliant boy Daniel is. Why didn't the rest of us think of that? And it's also in praise of the Torah, showing that the Torah is a wonderful set of rules, a wonderful law, given, of course, by Almighty God, and therefore flawless. And it saves the lives of the innocent because it specifies you have to have two witnesses who agree on all details. So, out of this law, out of this story, Susanna is vindicated, Daniel is vindicated, the two elders go down to punishment, and the Torah, given to us by God, that too is vindicated. It's a nice short story and it's full of good lessons, isn't it? I hope that helps. All the best. Bye.